Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Washington Nationals March to October. And guys, we did it. We made it to the postseason. We caught fire at the right time at the very end of the season, went on a massive winning streak. We also just flat out won a ton of games. Worked our way all the way back to not only lock up a wild card spot, but lock up a #1 wild card spot. But today's episode is not going to be the start of the postseason. We're going to do what I always like to do at the end of a regular season, and that is go through and recap whatever we can recap about that last season. So mainly what this is going to consist of is us just going through everybody's stats on the team one by one, because we can't just look at our stats here anymore because they're gone. So let's get it started first by talking about the standings, and the first thing is going to be us specifically at 95 and 67. The Nationals last season finished at a record of 55 and 107. So we had a 40 game turnaround, 40 more wins than a season before. I don't know what the record is. I don't even know how to go about finding it, but that has to be one of the biggest turnarounds from one season to the next, maybe ever. And also looking at our team rankings there in the top right, obviously the whole point of doing the Nationals for this March to October was we started at the 30th ranked team. So over the course of one season, just by our players getting better, having some call-ups, and then making a few trades, our rank has gone up from 30 all the way up to 24, which I feel like is pretty good, considering it's not like we added anybody huge. We also started the season ranked 22nd in contact, and we bumped that all the way up to 11th. We started the year ranked 30th in power, and we're still there. Not a lot of power in the attributes of this team, but as we'll see, we actually had a surprising amount of home runs hit. We were also, though, ranked 30th in pitching to start the season, and we bumped that all the way up to 19th. I feel like that is pretty good, and we'll see that for sure. We'll find out exactly why that happened. We started ranked 29th at defense. We only moved up to 27th, and then in speed we were actually ranked 17th, and we dropped down to 20th. As far as our initial projected wins after that very first game, we were only projected to win 67 games. So like we were projected to have the inverse record that we ended up having. So if it wasn't obvious enough, we massively outdid our projections for the start of the season. I couldn't remember where we started. I thought we started with like a 71 or 72 projected wins, but we were down under 70. So then now to get into the standings a bit, obviously we finished second. The Phillies finished first. They pretty much went wire to wire. It didn't take too long for them to move out into first place in the division, but once they did, I think they pretty much stayed there. The Mets were another 90 win team in the division, and they made it into, I think, the last wild card spot. And then the Braves, this is maybe the most shocking thing, is they still finished with, a solid record, 87 and 75, but they are the #1 ranked team in all the MLB based on their attributes, and they didn't even make the postseason, finishing 4th in our division. I don't know exactly what our record was against Atlanta throughout the season, but it had to have been pretty good because we swept them in that very first series of the year, and then we also played them, I think, in 7 games at the end of the year, and we either went 6-1 or 5-2 in those last 7. So there weren't too many games in between unaccounted for, but in the games that I know took place, we pretty much dismantled the Braves. I mean, if that went differently just in itself, those games versus the Braves, they'd be in, and who knows where we'd be. So then in the NL Central, it was the Cardinals winning the division with the same record that the Braves finished with, not making the playoffs. So the Cardinals, 87 and 75 was good enough to win that division. The Cubs couldn't come back and win it. The Brewers, they had some struggles this year, probably unexpectedly. In the West, it was the Padres with the same record we had winning the division. And then the Dodgers coming in second, taking that second wild card spot. They'll be our first matchup, and they're the #1 pitching team, which definitely scares me. The Giants also just missed out on a playoff spot with 88 wins, and then the Rockies were the punching bag of the league with 105 losses. That's the other thing I don't think I mentioned, is the Marlins finished one loss away, or like one different outcome away from everybody in our division finishing 500 or above. So like, we did what we did this season in the strongest and most difficult division to win games in. I guess a lot of that does help that the schedules were rebalanced going into this year, so there were less divisional games. Our record in division was only 26-26, so if we had to expand that to, what was it, 72 games before, that'd be a lot more losses on our ledger. So then these were the final wild card standings. We were first, then Dodgers, then Mets, and Giants and Braves were the first two out. And I feel like this is kind of crazy because obviously we had 3 division winners, and then on this screen in the wild card, 6 teams over 500. So 9 of the 15 teams in the National League were over 500. In the American League, it was the Yankees taking the East. 96-66 is where they finished. The Blue Jays took home a wild card spot at 88-74, and the Rays missed out on the playoffs. In the Central, it was the Guardians winning by plenty at 96-66. And then in the West, the Astros were the only 100-win team in all of baseball, winning that division. And then the Angels with a solid 93-win record, making it to the wild card, with the Mariners also sneaking in. So this is what those final wild card standings look like. The Rays missing out by 3 games. But now we're ready to go in and talk about our players' stats on the season. And we'll start with the hitting, because the first thing I want to bring up is I'm looking at a still of that very first episode loading into that very first game, where the game offered some predictions as to how our season would go in terms of team leaders for stats. So it didn't project any pitching stats, at least not that I saw. So we have average, OPS, home runs, RBI, stolen bases, and wins above replacement that the game projected before the start of the season. And I want you to keep these in mind as we're going through all the stats. So the first one is they projected Luis Garcia to lead the team in batting average with a 277 average. They picked Dom Smith to lead the team in OPS with 762. They also projected Dom Smith to lead the team in home runs with 21 and lead the team in RBI with 92. They projected Victor Robles to lead the team in steals with 17, which that might be the closest thing they got. And then they projected our wins above replacement leader to be Jeimer Candelario with a 1.1 wins above replacement. So like I said, just keep that in mind as we're going through here. So actually, the first thing I meant to mention is I said in that last episode that I was worried that the game would automatically call some people up from the minors for this postseason run, but that did not happen at all, at least on the offensive side. There was one on the pitching side, which wasn't egregious at all, but we'll get to it. But as far as the offense goes, they left the lineup completely intact, the 4 bench players completely intact. So we have the same team that got hot down the stretch taking the field. All right, so let's start talking about CJ Abrams. He went up this season to a 72 overall. I think he started at a 67, but look at that, plus 11 to his contact against righties. His contact versus righties is up to a 94. And then he also got a plus 6 to his power versus lefties, which might be good if that keeps improving at that rate. He's definitely very weak still against lefties, so we still need to see those numbers climb. The plate discipline though went up by 9, so that's going to be good too. Everything else went up pretty steadily. We need to see that fielding increase though, because he had a rough year fielding the baseball, and also that 14 stealing we'll see really hurt him. But this is his final stat line here. For a guy who started at a 67 overall, he had 39 doubles, 9 triples, and 10 bombs. With that power, he hit 10 home runs, double digits. He walked 50 times, which also with that plate discipline, starting the year at what, 22, he walked 50 times, only struck out 64 times, and this is where the stealing kind of hurt. He got caught more times than he successfully stole, which you'd hope a guy with his speed at 83 he'd steal bags, but that 14 stealing rating just really really hurt him. A 321 average with a 379 on base. He only leads off against righties, but I can tell you right now, even though we can't go and look at it, his splits, obviously, when you look at his attributes, I think he was batting like 350 or 360 against righties. So you really couldn't ask for a better leadoff hitter. An OPS of 855. So that's almost like a full 100 over what they projected our team leader to be. And he's not even close to being our team leader. He did have a rough season in the field though, making 21 errors. You can't really see defensive metrics too much just on this stat line here. So all we really get to see is the errors and the fielding percentage. So I guess the fielding percentage went up a bit, so maybe he's steadily improving, but as a shortstop, man, you gotta rein that in. And I think it was the errors and the bad stolen base percentage that only kept him at a 2.1 wins above replacement. Because I think if you take those things out of consideration, he probably had a way better season. And honestly, if those are the two things holding his WAR back, I'm completely fine with that because he's still a really good player. And he's just going to keep getting better. 22 years old with a B potential, already putting together a season like this. Then we move on to Corey Dickerson, who spent most of the season against righties batting in the 2-hole. And look at this. A guy who is 33 years old with a D potential actually improved. He started the season at a 65 overall, so he improved by 2, and he put together a really good season, pretty much the exact kind of season you'd want out of a 2-hole hitter. 160 hits, 27 doubles, 14 bombs, drove in some runs, walked a lot, not a lot of strikeouts. A batting average, another one over 300, 374 on base, 819 slugging, also over that projected team lead, and he finished with a wins above replacement of 2.8. And then this is the big one, Joey Meneses. And we have a surprise in store here because he went up to an A potential. I don't know how much of an effect that's going to have with him going into next season. He'll be 31. But we definitely saw this season, even with the crazy year he put together, he didn't really get the biggest amount of progression. I mean, he did jump up right at the end. Like, he hovered between an 84 and an 85 all year. But I'm assuming with that jump to an A potential, he also got a few more attributes to increase a bit more. So that bumped him up to that 86. But look at the year he put together. He played in all 162 games, DHing in every single one of them, so he never sat. He had 211 hits, which might have led the league. We can't go back and look. He scored 106 runs. He had 28 doubles with 2 triples and 44 home runs, which also might have led the league, but we don't know for sure. He drove in 127. He walked 99 times, also could have been league leading, and that's more walks than strikeouts. I don't know why somebody with 29 speed and 4 stealing is trying to steal 19 times. I feel like that's always a thing the CPU does, and it's kind of frustrating. But then the 332 average, 424 on base, 591 slugging to have an OPS over 1,000. He is our OPS leader. 741 plate appearances because he played in like every game, and no fielding. He never stepped foot in the field. He was a pure hitter. So he racked up a wins above replacement of 6.7. Now, I don't know if that's weighted correctly. I don't know if that's weighted amongst right fielders because that's what his primary position is, or if they weight it based on, you know, him DHing every game. But if that's a 6.7 wins above replacement as a DH, that is incredible. Then we move to Keibert Ruiz, who started the year at a 68 overall. He improved by 4, and he's still got a lot of room to go at only 24 years old. Nothing really jumps out at you in terms of what improved, though. Everything pretty much steadily improved. And this is the year he had as our starting catcher. 127 games played. He got a hit 155 times. 35 of them were doubles with a triple and 13 bombs, driving in 83. He walked only 46 times, but he also only struck out 49 times, under 50 strikeout. Another batting average over 300, another OPS over what they projected our team lead to be. So if you're keeping count, that is all 4 of our top players in the order, all playing above the projected team leaders. And then he finished with a wins above replacement of 3.8. Next up is Dom Smith. And if if you're looking at this like, hey, wasn't he just a 66 overall? Yeah, he was. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden he jumped from a 66 to a 69 just like immediately. He started the season at a 62 overall, so he had a 7 overall jump throughout the year. The hitting went up like crazy, and then everything else just pretty steadily improved. Remember, he was only 27 with a B potential, so we knew he'd improve, just not by this much. And we do still have him for one more season, so we definitely have his next season. But then after that, I mean, especially if he has another season improving anywhere close to this, he is definitely a candidate to sign back, because he'll still have a lot of good years left. And, you know, that B potential, he's just going to keep getting better. But this is the year he had. He only missed 3 games, and he was starting at first base the whole year, so he wasn't DHing like Meneses. I don't even know why he missed those 3 games, because he didn't start missing games until September when we called up Jake Alou, and then all of a sudden he missed 3 games. So he had 177 hits, 33 doubles, 2 triples, 24 home runs. So he outdid his own projection, which was projected at team leading, and he did better himself. 105 driven in. I think he's the first one to strike out over 100 times. He was actually somehow successful stealing bases with a 3 stealing rating and 37 speed. Batting average at 285, so the first one under 300, but that OPS is still over what they projected the team lead to be, along with the average, so that's still everybody. And then he finished with a WAR of 3.6. So he actually went into this season with a negative WAR, and we turned that completely around career-wise. Next up is Jeimer Candelario, who I thought was the most disappointing player maybe of the year, but we'll look at his stats and he actually turned in a pretty nice season. He did not improve at all. His overall did not change. It started at a 71 and he's still there. But yeah, I mean, look at this season he had. It was like sneaky good. 143 hits with 30 doubles, 3 triples and 14 homers, walking almost 60 times, hardly striking out, a solid batting average, 1 point below that 277 that was projected as the team lead, but the OPS is still over that 762 mark. And then he finishes with a 1.6 wins above replacement, because he also had a pretty rough year in the field, at least by fielding percentage, because that's all we have. Lane Thomas then is up next. I feel like he was also like kind of flew under the radar somehow, even though he was our second best overall player, like in terms of his overall rating. But he started the year at a 74 overall. He's up to a 78, so he had some pretty good progression. Plus 7 to that power against righties, and then everything else pretty much just steadily increasing. He's kind of the same as Dom Smith, where he's 27 with a B potential, so he's got a lot of good years left with time to reach that B potential. But he played in 148 games, getting 138 hits, 33 doubles, 21 homers, which that number is like good to get over 20 homers, but I'm a little disappointed by it because I think he was the first one on the team after Joey Meneses to get to 20, and he was stuck on 20 home runs forever, even during that super hot stretch where we won like, I don't know, 35 games and only losing like 5. So he only finished with 21 after getting to 20 relatively quick. Drove in 82 though, 66 walks, and I think he might have had the most strikeouts on the team, but he was the first one to finish with a batting average under the projected team lead and an OPS just barely under that projected team lead. I'd say he still had a pretty good season though. Like I'm very happy with this season, and he can definitely stick around, especially because we have him under contract, or arbitration, but basically under contract for the purposes of March to October. And then he finished with a wins above replacement of 0.9. I think the fielding probably held him back a bit because he only had a 55 fielding rating. On to Victor Robles, who started the year at a 66, so he also improved by 4 overall. And he had a really solid progression across the board, plus 11 to that power against lefties. He finishes with 130 games played, 74 runs scored, 127 hits, 22 doubles, 4 triples, 12 bombs. He drove in 53, pretty good walk and strikeout numbers, 15 steals. So I think that might be tied with Abrams for the team lead at 15. So that might be the only thing that we came up short in in terms of those preseason projections, but I'd say a solid year for him, and looking at his history, a bounce back year. 263 average with a pretty solid OPS. He was really valuable out in center field with his good fielding rating and good speed. 3.4 wins above replacement for him on the season, and we won't really worry about talking about it yet. We'll wait for the offseason, but he is somebody whose future we will have to think about. And then last up for the starting 9, but nowhere near least, is Luis Garcia, Mr. Clutch himself. Starting at a 68 overall, finishing at a 73. He had plus 10 to his contact against righties, plus 8 to his power against righties, and then everything else pretty steady across the board. He had 139 games played, 161 hits with 31 doubles, 4 triples, 23 home runs for Luis Garcia. Drove in 88 out of the 9 hole. The stealing needs some work though, or just like don't steal. But a 315 average, 360 on base, 526 slugging out of the 9 hole. I can say with a decent amount of confidence he won't be batting in the 9 hole a ton next season, but I kind of didn't want to screw it up with how successful he was doing in the 9 hole this year. I don't know, whenever somebody is like doing really well in their spot, I kind of like to leave him there. Well, and I guess also part of that is because Corey Dickerson in the 2 spot, where I probably would have moved Garcia, was also doing pretty good, so I didn't see much of a need to flip him around. But yeah, Garcia finishes then with a wins above replacement of 4.4. That might be the next highest behind Meneses, if I remember right. And yeah, I really couldn't be a whole lot happier with our middle infield development, because both these guys are like the same player in terms of their age and their potential. They're both 22 years old. They're both a B potential, and they both progressed, I think, 5 overall this year. So they're just going to keep getting better together. And even though, you know, we have other guys on this team who are really good, they might be like the building blocks of the team. Like they're kind of who we're gonna probably build around as far as this March to October goes. Moving to the bench, and we won't spend too long on these guys because they didn't spend too long playing games, but Riley Adams was our backup catcher all season at a D potential. He actually improved across the board. Only went up 1 overall, but still a decent amount of improvement. And he actually had a pretty decent year as far as backup catching is concerned. He was doing way better near the middle of the year, surprisingly, because that's when we as a team weren't doing better. But yeah, not too much to talk about here. 6 bombs, 7 doubles, pretty solid slash line. The OPS at 745, that's actually real good for a backup catcher. 0.5 wins above replacement off the bench. We'll take it. And I know we have Israel Pineda coming up through the minors. It's not really on me to make the decision of who's the backup catcher next year, but if it's Riley Adams again, I won't really be upset. Then we have Jeter Downs, who got the call about halfway through the season. He had some decent progression across the board. Didn't do that amazing. I think most of these numbers are probably against lefties and definitely not when I played. But yeah, I mean, 3 doubles, 3 bombs in only 20 games. Coming off the bench, that's not bad. OPS of 721. He did finish with a negative WAR though. I'm assuming that might be because of his 2 errors and 2 times caught stealing without being successful, or just the overall not too great numbers, I guess. Then we have Ildemaro Vargas, who was like sneaky good off the bench, especially when I would play a game with him, I feel like. He got into 59 games and got 60 hits. Hit for a decent amount of power with 7 doubles, 2 triples, and 5 homers. Might have the best stolen base percentage on the team, and this slash line is pretty solid. He was good as a backup. 1.3 WAR as a backup. And then you have Alex Call, who, like, I don't know, this might be our weirdest player of the whole year, because I feel like you don't think of him as being somebody who'd be over a 70 or at a 70. He started at a 68, so he improved to get there. But like, as far as the attributes go for players rated this low, he's actually pretty good against righties, but we just did not find a spot, because like most of our guys were better against righties, so he just wasn't good enough to crack our lineup, and then he wasn't going to play against lefties because he couldn't hit them. But he actually finished with pretty decent numbers. Played in in over half the games, got 300 at bats. He hit 22 doubles, 6 homers, finished with a 259 average, OPS over that projected team lead at 765. Finished with a WAR over 1. I feel like he was just kind of like I said, almost sneaky good. Good backup at least. That's a good way to put it. And oh man, I am really relishing in this stat recap. I always take way too long and get way too into it, but I feel like this one's on a different level. I don't know, I just had a lot of fun with this first season with the Nationals. So I'm having a lot of fun diving into these stats. So yeah, over to pitching, and the first thing you might notice, the CPU actually did this. They realigned the pitching rotation based on overalls. So they have Josiah Gray in the 5th starter spot. We don't want that for the postseason. He was like our ace. And I feel like I remember in the past on March to Octobers in playoff runs, they reorder this rotation after every game, no matter what you do. So I'm gonna try to move Gray up to that 2 spot. We'll still leave Strasburg as the ace, but I'm worried that after that first game, it'll just move it back to what it was, and then we won't get to use who statistically was our best pitcher in the playoffs. And then the only call up that happened that I hinted at is the game decided to bring Erasmo Ramirez back up for the postseason run and get rid of Trevor Williams, which I'm not too upset about, because I feel like if we're in a game where we need a long reliever to eat up a lot of innings, that's probably not a game we're going to end up winning anyway. And Erasmo Ramirez as actually like a 1-inning guy might be better than Trevor Williams anyway. So let's start with Strasburg's stats. He started at an 82 and stayed at an 82. We had his call up that gave him a little bit of an attribute boost, and that seemed to be just enough to keep him afloat at the same overall he started at. So he missed, I think, 3 starts, maybe 4 starts. He made 29 starts after we called him up, and he had an amazing year. He had an amazing finish to the year, because for most of the year, his ERA was hovering over 4. So in that final stretch where we won like every game, he got that ERA all the way down to 3.12. He pitched over 200 innings, only gave up 186 hits. The walks, not crazy high, but a little high. 236 strikeouts though, and then the whip at 121. He made 20 quality starts out of 29. Finished with a 5 wins above replacement. I mean, he picked up for us where he left off in 2019. It's like he shrugged off these 3 years of injuries and just got back to the exact form he left at. He's also somebody we'll have to think about their future, but that'll come later. So next we'll talk about Josiah Gray, who probably was our best starter. At least he was who I always considered to be our ace. And he started at a 71 overall, and that's actually something I wanted to mention that I forgot about. Remember when we were looking at our team rankings and we started ranked 30th in pitching and moved up to 19th? Well, this is why. Because our pitching started in a place where our rotation had Josiah Gray and Mackenzie Gore at a 71, and they were our 2 best starters. And the bullpen was even worse. We had Carl Edwards Jr. at a 71, Kyle Finnegan was at a 70, and then everybody else was below a 70. So we can see why our pitching improved as much as it did. But let's get back to the stats. Josiah Gray himself went up 5 plus 7 of that Ks per 9 and plus 7 of that home runs per 9. He made 33 starts, only went 14 and 12, so he must not have always had the best run support, or maybe he had some bad starts, but a lot of really good starts. Only 181 hits in his 229 innings. He did give up 24 home runs, but that's way less than he gave up a year before in like 80 more innings. 259 strikeouts, I think, led the National League. Then he had a 3.10 ERA with a 112 whip. 26 quality starts, 7 complete games, 4 of them shutouts. Finishes with a wins above replacement of 5.2. And he's still got a long ways to go, man. 25 years old with a B potential. And speaking of players with a long way to go, next up is Yohan Adon. He was, I think, our first fast track of the year. He started at, I don't even remember, I think it was either 62 or 63 overall. We got him fast tracked, Then we brought him up, got him another attribute boost in the bigs, and I think that attribute boost only brought him up to a 75, so he went up another 4 overall throughout the course of the year. So he's already almost an 80 overall with a B potential and only being 24 years old. In 22 starts, he got a decision in 20 of them, 13-7 with 157 innings pitched, a good number of strikeouts, an ERA at 3.14, just a really solid season out of a guy that completely came out of nowhere, who also had 7 complete games with 4 shutouts. 3.7 wins above replacement. And then next up, we got Cade Cavalli. He started the season at a 67 overall, so he had a plus 12 increase to his overall. And he was on the team for a long time to start the year, hovering between that 67 and a 70 for the first like 4 months or so. And then I made some trade or call up where I then had Cade Cavalli get sent down, which worked to absolute perfection because then we got a call up chance with him with an attribute boost. We got him boosted, and then he also had a bit of a Dom Smith effect where he like jumped up 2 or 3 more overall right before the season ended. So he finishes at a 79 overall, being 24 years old with a B potential. Just crazy improvements to all of his per nines. We had that 19 strikeout game with him right at the end, which might have helped. Finishes with a 12-6 record, 183 innings pitched, and that's a lot of innings for a guy who had a stint in the bullpen and in the minors. He had 196 strikeouts, so I think that's everybody so far. Had a strikeouts per 9 over 9, so more strikeouts than innings pitched. He also got that ERA down under 4, finishing at 3.78. Finishes with a 2.2 wins above replacement. And honestly, these numbers are more impressive when you remember how much of the year he spent being under 70 overall. Like, he did not have these ratings for most of the year, and he still put up a really nice season overall. Him right now, like, I would love to know his numbers after getting his boost, because he might be elite. And surprisingly, with all of our young players, I think Cade Cavalli is really the only one who was a rookie. So he's definitely in contention for Rookie of the Year. And then the last starter in the rotation, we have Mackenzie Gore, who really saved his season at the very end. He also started at a 71, made his way up to a 76. We'll see by the stats how much an A potential actually matters, because really, if you compare him and Josiah Gray, there is no way that Mackenzie Gore should have had as much of an overall increase as Gray did. But he finishes with 35 games pitched, 21 starts, a winning record. And when you take into account that until, mid-August, he had an ERA of 7.70, these numbers start looking a little bit better. Because he was struggling the entire year. I was worried that his development was going to get ruined. But then we just miraculously had a no-hitter chance in a player lock with him, where we were already winning the game. What was it, 21-0? So all I did was throw nothing but junk, didn't care how many guys I walked, and we finished the no-hitter, giving him a +3 boost, and we see the results of that because he finished with a 5.43 ERA. I think he was the only starter to not strike out as many innings as he pitched. I don't know. I don't put too much stock into these numbers just because he's been a completely different player after that player lock. But he still finishes with a 1.4 WAR, a FIP at 442, which with how bad he was for so much of the year, I find very impressive. And even though he had a good end, I think the best spot for him, and I might try and do it, although again I think the CPU will just move it back, but I want him in the bullpen because we only have that one lefty, so having a second lefty coming out of the bullpen for a postseason run I think would be pretty valuable. But now we can move on to the bullpen, the final stretch here, guys. This might end up being my longest stat recap ever. Hunter Harvey, he started the year at a 64 overall. He's up to a 67. To start the year, he was really the only bullpen arm that had any sort of potential. He was a B, but he's already 28 years old, only a 64. He had some decent progression, didn't really get to pitch all that often, wasn't amazing in the times he did get to pitch, but also wasn't terrible. So yeah, only the 13 innings. He had a 4.05 ERA. That's not really much to really judge him on. He did finish with a WAR negative. And then we have Erasmo Ramirez, who we know just got called up, but he did pitch plenty to talk about his stats because he actually had a solid year. He started losing it for about a month or so before we sent him down, but until that point, he was like our best reliever. I swear his ERA stayed under 1 for like the first 20 innings he pitched maybe, but he finished with a 3.40 ERA, a really good whip. I think actually he's a really nice addition to our bullpen going into the postseason. Oh man, and then Joe Mantiply. We didn't end up making a ton of trades this year, and actually every single trade was for a bullpen arm, but Joe Mantiply has to be the best trade we made. I don't remember what his overall was when we got him. I think maybe a 76. He's up to a 78 now, even though he's already 32. We have him under team control for a couple more seasons, and look at the year he put together as our only lefty in the bullpen. I don't know how he had the time to blow 4 saves while only giving up 6 earned runs. But he only gave up 6 earned runs. He had a 1.32 ERA. He had a .68 whip in 41 innings. Insane season from Joe Mantiply. My favorite arm to bring in out of the bullpen. He had a 1.3 WAR. Then we have Kenley Jansen, another guy we traded for. I'm probably going to go ahead and put him back in the closer role. The CPU automatically put Edwards back there. But Kenley, he had all kinds of regression this year. I have no idea what his overall was at the start of the season, but the first time that I saw a trade pop up involving him, I actually declined it, and he was a 78, and he had already been regressing a lot. So by now he's down to a 75, but he actually turned in a really nice season. I think his ERA was over 4. And I think well over 4 when we traded for him. So he got that ERA down to about 3.5, made 19 saves. I'm not sure how many with us, but I think the majority. And yeah, at the time that I made this trade, that was actually when we were in about our worst spot of the year, and I thought we were out of it. So the only reason I made this trade was because Patrick Corbin was involved in it from our side. And even though we're paying Kenley 16 mil, it still saved like 9 mil to get rid of Corbin's contract. So I only made this trade to save money. And then Kenley turned out to be a really solid closer, and especially now that we're in the postseason, he's actually turned into a very valuable piece. And then we have Kyle Finnegan, who was our second best relief pitcher to start the year. I think I said that he started at a 70. He must have started at a 71 because it doesn't say he improved. But he had a really nice year. 25 innings pitched. He had a 2.84 ERA. A lot of strikeouts, not a lot of hits allowed. 114 whip is really good. 0.6 WAR. I mean, there's nothing really to say about him. He was just a really solid arm who honestly maybe shouldn't have been, at least not as good as he was. And he's honestly, with all the moves we made to the bullpen, he's honestly somebody I kind of forgot about to use, but he's definitely got some value. And then we come to Nick Sandlin, who really does give Mantiply a run for his money when you're talking about who was our best trade. In the long run, Sandlin definitely could be our best trade because he's only 26 with a B potential, and we have him for a lot of time. Really good progression from him. I think he might have been a 76 when we got him. He's up to a 79. That 96 hits per 9 is wild. Like that is crazy. Nobody's gonna get hits off of him, and this is the year he put together. I don't remember what his numbers were when we traded for him, but he got that ERA under 2 in 45 and 2/3 innings, only 27 hits allowed. The walks, we knew they were gonna be a problem. He has a really low walks per 9. It actually improved a lot though, but they were not that big of a problem because we see his whip is still just barely over 1. So if he's not going to give up any hits, we can live with a couple extra walks. 0.9 WAR for him on the season, and yeah, he's going to be good. Scott Effross was another trade we made, so that's 4 new bullpen arms we added through trades. He's a C potential at 29 years old. We got him locked up for a long time. I think he improved by and overall, and the CPU didn't like pitching with him. He only got 7 2/3 innings, 9 games, and in that time he wasn't great, but I'm not reading into that too much. He's going to be a good arm for us now and moving forward. And then lastly was Carl Edwards Jr. He was our closer until we got Kenley. He did really well in that role, picking up 19 saves. He had a 2.43 ERA. on the season, and every time I pitched with him, he was absolutely disgusting. Just unhittable. Another guy I kind of forgot to use as the season went on and we got a bunch of new arms, but I don't know, man. If he's like our 5th, 6th option out of the bullpen, our bullpen's in very good shape. And that's it in terms of who was on our 26-man roster to start the playoffs. There is one more thing I want to look at before we end it, and that's just our depth chart to see if there's anybody else we can take a look at. I want to see Trevor Williams because his year deserves to be looked at too. He was very important to this team's early success this season. He fell apart. His ERA finished over 4. It was actually about 4.5 when he lost his starter role and moved to the pen. But to start the season, the argument could be made that he was our best pitcher for like 2 months. He was hardly walking anybody. His ERA was like way down. He was going deep into games a lot. He definitely fell apart as the season went on, but if he wasn't as good as he was at the beginning, maybe we don't finish as strong as we did. Maybe we don't have enough, even with the push we made at the end, to get back into the hunt. So he was very important, even though he's not going to be part of the postseason run. I really don't think there's anybody else we can see from the depth chart screen. The only other player that I think I remember besides some random bullpen arms that actually accumulated some stats would have been Carter Keyboom, but he's such a low overall that he doesn't even show up anywhere throughout all these years in the depth chart. We do have some of our prospects like Elijah Green, Robert Hassel, James Wood, Brady House. We'll look at them and their progression after the postseason's over, when it's time to look at the offseason. So then that is going to be all we have to talk about here for this stat recap episode, and man, I just can never rein myself in. I sat down thinking, all right, I'm gonna keep this one relatively concise. Maybe we'll try and keep it under a half an hour, and I know we didn't even come close to that. So to anybody who has stuck around, if there even is anybody who sticks around to this point of an episode, thanks for sticking around. We will get the postseason started in next episode. We have a 3-game series against the Dodgers to advance. It's going to be stressful. So if you did make it all the way to this point in the video, man, you may as well leave a like for me. And if you're somehow not subscribed and you made it this far, hit that subscribe button, man. Come on. But that does it for us today in this stat recap. I'm sorry, but it has to be done just for my own enjoyment, and hopefully for at least a couple other people's enjoyment too. So thank you guys for watching today. I can't even really say thanks for stopping by when a video goes this long, but I will see you next time in the postseason.